welcome to Coding After Work stream. This is our first stream. Thank you so much for joining us today and for the opportunity to wear pants. Well, you can see Jessica are wearing pants. Me, I'm still a mystery. We have a Discord channel, which we would love for you to join. There you can suggest guests for a stream or for the podcast, and we can talk about code, all the things that we are passionate about. Let's build that community together. We will post a link in the chat on Twitch. We would also love for you to like this channel on Twitch. If you're not logged in, please do and like this channel because you will get notifications whenever we go live.
We will, of course, also post these videos on YouTube, and we do have a favor to ask. For us to be able to change the friendly URL on YouTube, we need to have more followers. So we would really appreciate if you would go over there and subscribe there as well. But enough about us. We are here to listen to Stacy Cashmore. Welcome, Stacy.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening. Are you wearing pants?
No.
No. See?
I'm wearing a dress, always dresses.
Nice save.
I'm the only one wearing pants today. Or am I?
The mystery
Thank
continues.
you so much for... Oh, yeah. Yeah. I can take pictures and post afterwards, maybe. Let's see.
Not safe for work pictures.
No, let's not. He's wearing pants. There, I've said it. So how are you doing today?
Not bad.
Not bad.
Happy to be here. It's awesome with your first stream. It's thank you for trusting me with it.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, we should say. We will have a blast, I'm sure. Are you ready to kick it off?
I'm ready to kick it off.
Take it away, Stacy.
So, good evening, everybody, and thank you, as I say, so much for joining us here tonight. I love working with my colleagues. I love bouncing ideas between each other, complementing each other's knowledge, and using our combined talents to solve complex business or technical challenges. Basically, I love working in close-knit teams. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened quite as often as I would have liked it to. All too often, I've seen team members working on different things. Maybe they're working on different stories in the same project. Maybe they're even working on completely different projects. Each person working on something different so that they can all be independent from each other. And I find that an interesting word, independent, especially in a team situation. Because in these situations, are we even a team at all? Or are we simply a collection of colleagues working independently at the same island of desks? And that word, independent, it isn't free. It's a word that comes with costs. Inside my team, I now have way less insight into what my fellow team members are doing. Outside of a 15-minute stand-up where everybody talks about unconnected things, and let's face it, we pretty much sleep, we don't really know what each other is doing anymore. And because of that disconnect, because some connection is lost between the team members, even if we're a really close team otherwise, that bouncing ideas around, helping each other out becomes really, really hard. Because when we try to bounce ideas, when we try to help each other, it means we have to context switch. One or other of us has to interrupt what we're doing. And it gives the teams other issues as well. We now have far more work in progress. Each story takes longer to complete. There's only one person working on it, so they have to work on it for a longer time. And this means that a lot of the time, team members end up owning their own set of stories. And this ownership of a set of stories, it gives other issues regarding resilience as well. Because if each person has their own area, then what happens if they're really lucky, They win the lottery and they quit the next day. Or maybe more reasonably, they just go on vacation. Or even if they're just ill. All of these things interrupt our ability to provide value to our customers in a timely, fluid fashion. But I said I was going to talk about pair programming, and I've not touched that yet. So why do I think these things are connected? Well, one way we can help teams not fall into this trap of being independent colleagues at the same island of desks is to pair program. When we do it right, we get to work together, and I mean really together, to think of those better solutions, to encourage that better collaboration, and to implement them with less time for our customers. Hi, I'm Stacy Cashmore, and I've been a software developer since the mid-1990s. Over that time, I've worked in various industries, companies, and roles, and I've seen lots of different ways that teams can work together. Some of them are better than others. Now, in my previous job, I managed to work for 14 years, starting in 2006, and I saw the whole range of ways that we could work together. When I started on day one, we were all individuals. In fact, my first project when I arrived after I installed my machine was to implement a complex algorithm in the middle of our car insurance system by myself. There were a couple of bigger projects there. They had more people, but they were still individuals. There wasn't that collaboration going on a regular basis. And we saw the issues that this brought to us. And so we decided in 2012 that we were going to adopt Scrum. We were going to work in teams and get things done together. But it turned out we were still individuals in those teams and in those projects. In fact, we even got questions back from the teams. How can we all work on the same project? We're all in the same code base. We're treading on each other's toes. It's merge hell, and it's slowing us down. Over the next 8 years, the teams tried different ways to try and improve the way that they work together, to try and solve the problems that we saw. My last 4 years in the company was with an exceptional team who were constantly experimenting and trying new things just to see what we could find that worked for ourselves. And it turned out pair programming became a big part of this. And it was an amazing learning experience for us. And despite the fact that it took a huge amount of effort to get it working, it paid dividends on that effort when we did it. Not only for us as developers, but also for the company as a whole. So if I say it's so great, why am I talking about it? Why isn't everybody just doing it already? Well, there's things which, if they happen, they make pair programming less than great. And this evening, I just want to talk about the most common thing that happens. And I call it sleepy pairing. It's something I'm sure we've all seen. You have 2 or more people sitting behind one computer. One person behind the keyboard, they're feverishly working away. They're working the problem through. They're coming up with a solution. They're fighting that solution when it just doesn't do what they want. And then they turn that into code and put it into the computer. The other person, maybe they're sitting just behind the shoulder, silently, watching every key press that happens, making the person at the keyboard really uncomfortable, but not really doing much. Or maybe that person is a meter or so away. They're playing with their phone. Occasionally, they glance up at the screen and go, yeah, before they return to Facebook, Twitter, shooting zombies on an MMO game. And I liken this to a long car journey. You have the driver. They're concentrating the whole day. They're looking out for traffic problems. They're figuring out which way they need to go, watching the road, trying to keep everybody safe. Passengers, meanwhile, they're just struggling to try and stay awake. Maybe you have that person who's just constantly watching the driver, making them feel really bad about what they're doing. Maybe you've got a person in the passenger seat. They're just staring out of the window, watching the world go by. And maybe if you've got somebody who's really lucky not to have motion sickness, they've got their phone out and they're binging Netflix until the battery runs out. And at the end of the journey, the driver gets out of the car, they stretch, they walk inside, they hope they have somewhere to recuperate. They are exhausted. They've been concentrating so long, they've got a headache, they just want to close their eyes. Passengers are also falling asleep. They're still really tired. It's just that it's from boredom, not from the concentration. And so it is with developers and sleepy pairing. That person doing the heavy lifting, sitting at the keyboard, they're more tired than they normally would have been. They've had the same workload as normal, only now they've had it with somebody watching every key press, feeling judged the whole time, but not really getting any help. And that person sitting behind my shoulder, okay, they have been concentrating. They've been concentrating on watching somebody else type code, and that is really tiring. But they've also got this really nagging feeling that they've not been using their time wisely. The person sitting a meter or so away with the phone, they have an awesome score on that zombie game. But they've also got that feeling that they should have been of more use today. Both of them are feeling a bit useless because of this. So the next day, they all return to their own machines, put on their noise-cancelling headphones to drown out the open plan office, and go back to working independently. They feel the previous day was just a waste of time, and you know what? So's pair programming. But it's not only the navigator that can be sleepy. Drivers can be sleepy too, and the results are just as bad. And in my experience, this kind of happens when pairs start to try and use the driver and navigator roles. You've got the driver. They have the keyboard, they're entering the code. And the navigator, solving the problem, telling the driver what to do. Now, this can really help because that sleepy person watching, they take the navigator role, and the yuppie and the zombie killer can't do that anymore. They have to be actively involved, or the driver can't drive. This is great. We have involvement from both parties. We are working together to solve problems. The navigator's coming up with ideas, figuring out the solution. The driver's listening to the solution and they're putting the code in that they're told in at the keyboard. Kind of sounds idyllic. People around the typist are actively involved here. We don't have any more yupping and we don't have any more zombies. Only I'm not so sure, because when I see this happen, I think we do end up with a zombie. It's just not in that MMO game. It's the typist. And I'm using that word deliberately, typist, because they're sitting, banging the words in that the navigator's telling them to do. But whilst they're doing this, they're not thinking about what they're putting into the computer. To return to our driving metaphor, have you seen the stories about drivers who end up at the wrong destination? They have a navigation system and they do everything that that system says without thinking. They end up lost in the middle of a field. In the worst cases that you see, trapped in a narrow road between two houses, in water, and the worst one, even in the wrong country. The navigation system says, you have arrived. And you think, well, yeah, maybe, but where? How did I get here? And why are my feet wet? And at the end of the day, we now have exhausted people again. That person that's done all the thinking. While they've been doing all this thinking, they've been held up, waiting for the other person to finish typing. And that can get really frustrating. You know the keyboard shortcuts they're not using, and it drives you bananas just trying to think how to get this person to work the way that you want to work. And whilst you're getting frustrated, you can't continue trying to find the solution to your problem, because if you do that, you're going to get a disconnect from the driver, you're going to get lost from each other, and it's going to become even more difficult. And our typist, bashing those keys with no thoughts, they were also exhausted. Yesterday, the person at the keyboard was exhausted doing all of the heavy lifting alone. Now they're exhausted just thinking, I didn't become a developer just to put somebody else's words into my computer. not including Stack Overflow here. So the next day, we return to our machines, put on our noise-canceling headphones to drown out the open plan office, and go back to working independently. Feeling the previous day? It was a waste. And you know what? Except for some complex problems, so is pair programming in general. Now, these two issues, the sleepy navigator, the sleepy driver, when they occur, teams can find it really hard to continue. My experience has been that when you reach one of these plateaus and one of these stages, the teams give up multiple times, no matter which one they hit. It's something that's really hard to break through. And they use these as some of the biggest reasons not to even try pair programming. Companies or developers, I've heard both give these reasons. Teams give up before they've even started. But there are some things that we can do to help this situation, to make it not only so that pair programming works, but so that it pays those dividends back that I was talking about on the effort that it needs to work. So let's tackle the sleepy navigator first. Now, when we noticed pairing, or when we started pairing, we noticed that a big problem is distractions. The world is full of them, especially our phones. Most of us are addicted to our phones. I know that I am. In fact, when I've given this talk live at this point of the presentation, generally there's a few people in the audience look up from their phones a little bit guiltily at me. And it's easy why. These things provide us a world of distractions. Email, Slack, Teams, Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp. And if we're not busy typing with our fingers, it is so easy to allow our fingers to creep to it, to pick them up, and to check them. And I'm afraid to say it takes a lot of mental energy to remove this distraction. There's a few things that I tried to get rid of it. The first one is putting it face down so I couldn't see the notifications. That doesn't work because you just turn it over and then turn it back again. The next thing I did was put it, at arm's length away. That doesn't work because all you end up doing is stretching to pick it up and check it, and then stretching to put it back. Great for the daily workout, not so great to get rid of the distraction. Eventually, I just had to get rid of it completely. I was pairing with a colleague opposite my desk, and I picked up my phone, and I gently, because, glass smartphone, not a Nokia 3310, tossed it onto my desk behind his. It felt awful. Like I say, I'm addicted to my phone. But it worked because I couldn't reach and get it anymore. If I wanted to do that, I'd actually have to stand up and walk around the island of desks. And that's just a little bit too embarrassing. And after a while, that pain of not having access to my phone, it kind of goes away. And you can concentrate more. And you can get into things. Most of the things that I was checking, they weren't urgent. Twitter, WhatsApp. Let's face it, it's just habit and fear of missing out on updates. It's not important. Emails, on the other hand, I used to get those on my phone, and that took a little bit more effort. As you see, when I'm working at my own machine, if an important mail comes in, I see it. When I'm working at somebody else's machine, it came in on the phone. If I've got rid of my phone, I can no longer see it. What happens if there's a major issue? What happens if somebody needs something really urgently from me? What happens if production is on fire and it's all hands on deck? I'm not going to know. But of course, I am going to know. It's fine I'm not getting those mails. Because if something is that urgent, someone's going to come and find me. And if they don't come and find me, it's probably not that urgent in the first place. So by removing these distractions, we managed to get more into the flow and we started to work better as a pair. But we still needed to take care of that sleepy driver. And to do that, we looked at the definitions and we changed them ever so slightly for ourselves. We now have our navigator. That's the person who thinks of the solution. And they explain it to the driver until the driver understands it enough to write our code. We no longer tell them code. And the driver is somebody who listens to the navigator, tries to understand what that navigator is saying, and they turn that understanding into code. To return to our driving metaphor one last time, when you're driving, your job isn't to listen to that satellite navigation system and to do what it says without thinking. Your job is to listen to those instructions, think about them, check they're right, make sure it's safe to use them, and get your passengers to the right place safely. And when you're a driver in a pair situation, it's not just your job to follow the instructions of the navigator without thinking. It is to listen to the navigator, to try to understand what they're trying to achieve. And if you don't understand it, don't code anything. The navigator needs to understand that the driver has to have this understanding before we start. If the understanding isn't there, you need to explain it differently until it is. That might involve getting up and going over to a whiteboard. I've done that a few times, and that just brings more benefits with it. What you don't do is just grab the keyboard off of the driver and say, I'm just going to do this quickly. You can have it back in a second. Because as soon as you do that, you're back into sleepy pairing. The person who's not at the keyboard is no longer involved. And as a driver, you're going to be following along with the navigator, thinking along with them, and suddenly you're just going to get that flash of inspiration. And now you know exactly how we're going to solve this problem. And at that point, you don't just take the keyboard and start putting your undoubtedly awesome solution into it. Rather, you excitedly give your keyboard to the navigator, you tell them your amazing idea, and you switch roles. Because again, if you just start typing and putting your great solution into the computer, the navigator's no longer involved in the process. They're going back to sleep. And if we ensure that each person fulfills the roles in this way, without distraction, being an active member of the pair, then we start to move from sleepy pairing into strong pairing. And this is where those benefits I was talking about really start to happen. Now, the first of these benefits is collaboration. We are now really working together. We're not working on different things and just trying to mash it together at the end. We are working together to get one thing finished before we move on to the next. We are bouncing those ideas between each other. We are helping each other improve, and we are using our joint talents to solve problems together. We also found that we communicated way more and way better. And this one's kind of a little bit chicken and egg scenario. I don't know if we improved our communication and so improved our ability to pair program, or as we learned to pair program better, our communication organically evolved as we did so. Either way, communication is something that improved drastically with this process. And that meant that we were sharing knowledge way more than we were before. We no longer had those islands of knowledge and those people with their own areas. And that meant that when that person won the lottery and quit, or went on vacation, or when they were ill for a day, it was no longer a huge problem for us. Because we're pairing, there's at least two people with that knowledge. So there's still one person who can carry on the same as they did before. Maybe they even start a new pair and share the knowledge yet again. We also found that our PR process became so much smoother and simpler with this because it was an ongoing process. As a driver, they're validating the thoughts of the navigator and the thoughts of the solution real time. And the navigator is validating that the code the driver's producing is what they were thinking and is good, again, in real time. So that when we came to make our pull requests, which we managed to keep smaller because we kept each other on our toes, we just double check the changes that we were making to our commit. The navigator would run back to their desk, approve the pull request, and then continue. Now, that whole checking the commit before you make your pull request is such an important part of this step. If you don't do that, bad things can still sneak in, and this whole benefit kind of disappears altogether. But when we did it right, it was so much better. We no longer had the context switches that the old PR process had, where you throw a pull request to somebody and interrupt them. They make their comments and they throw it back to you, interrupting you again. You make changes, answer comments, and throw it over the wall again, and so forth, until it gets approved and goes back into our main branch. With this way of working, the only context switch we had was when we actually changed to the new task. That's kind of acceptable. The last benefit that I would like to talk about is one that isn't immediately self-evident, and that was our onboarding process. When we started to work and putting new people, developers or testers, in a pair. Now, normally when you start a new job, I at least always find it kind of a daunting task. You get a machine, you get a big stack of paperwork, and you spend time trying to learn the system, trying to become productive. And on some really complex systems, that can take weeks or more. But rather than doing that, throw your new person with an existing one, get them to pair together. This has a
I'm sorry, Stacy. We cannot hear you. I think your microphone seems to be unplugged. Or at least StreamYard thinks so. It's our fault. It's our first stream. Of course, at some point, something will go wrong.
How did that suddenly become mute?
There you go.
That's so freaky. I'm sorry.
That's the first stream jitter for us, I think.
Woo, it has to happen. It could be worse.
Exactly. Sorry, carry on. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to assume you heard it until this point. So why do I advocate pair programming? Like I said, I am passionate about this. And I like to paraphrase G. Paul Hill, who, if you're on Twitter, @G. Paul Hill, is an awesome person to follow. And he has this to say about test-driven development. We are in this for the money. And so it is with me and pair programming. When it's practiced, when it's done right, I can get value into the hands of my users quicker. I can get that value there with more thought put into it about how it works, about how it's built. Now, make no mistake, it is seriously hard to do it right. If it was easy, we'd all be doing it and I wouldn't be talking about it. But the benefits that I see when you make it work, to me as an individual, to the teams I've worked with, it makes me love doing it. So I invite you to give it a go. Work your way through those difficult sleepy stages. Figure out how you can make it work for you and your team. See the benefits that it can bring you. I've been Stacy Cashmore. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Stacy. I certainly know that I'm definitely the one looking in frustration when the typist doesn't know the shortcuts. And I know for sure that Jim is the one feeling exhausted when someone is looking at his every single keystroke. And his typing skills kind of isn't the best when I look at it.
It's amazing how bad your typing gets when somebody's watching you intently.
Yeah, definitely. I think we have a few questions. Let's see. Is there an optimal length of time between switching when you are pairing?
There is an optimal length of time, but it's dependent on the particular people. So I know people that can pair for 3-4 hours without a problem. Longer than that starts to become kind of an issue. And I know people that after an hour or so, they need a break. When you get into a new pair, what I found is the pair need to figure out what their optimal time is. And they need to make sure that they keep note of their energy levels. And when they see it starting to go, stop for a coffee, a water, a walk, whatever. Just make sure you get that break so that you can come back better again.
Good advice. Oh, we have someone else who have that problem. I type like an idiot when someone is watching. Is there actually something that we can do about that? I mean, pair programming, they are bound to sit there behind you or besides you.
Yep. The way that I try and handle this when I'm pair programming, when I'm giving a demo and I have to type, I just try and make jokes of it myself, because if I can make jokes about it myself, it kind of calms me down a little bit and helps me go forward. The other one that helps in the real pairing situations, but that's something that takes time to happen between the pair, is when you reach a level of psychological safety with each other so that it's no longer this big thing that you're typing in front of somebody new, but it's just a standard everyday thing. You're still going to make the typing mistakes, but on the bright side, the person watching you is also going to be helping you. If you have a good relationship, you can have a good time with each other even when you make the mistakes.
That is so true for everything, isn't it? As long as you feel safe, you will become better at it.
Yeah.
Could pair programming, if done well, replace programming individually? And should we strive for that?
I personally would say yes for me. This is one of those wonderful ones where you give that horrible answer of it depends. When I see this done well, I really don't want to go back to working individually. And we noticed in my last team that even the small changes where you initially say, well, you know what, this just isn't complex enough, so we'll split up at this point. The actual lead time for getting something done is still shorter with pair programming. So even if we were changing text on a HTML page, that obviously you don't need two people to think about this because it's easy. But by having that process of being able to do it together, make the pull request together, approve the pull request instantly and move on to the next thing, the actual flow of work made up for the fact that you've got two people putting one piece of text on a screen. It doesn't always work for everybody. And so I find it hard to say it's something that we should strive for. I would say it's something that I would recommend trying and really trying to push yourself through the difficult stages to see if it's something that you should strive for yourself and for your team. And of course, it only works if you're geolocated. If you're working with somebody who's 3 hours away, you're always going to have 6 hours in a working day where somebody is working alone. And there's other ways that you can help each other out to make sure that you stay in the flow there.
Awesome. Oh, this is a good question. Pair programming versus mob programming. Is there a difference? And is one of them better than the other?
There is a difference. And this is one that we're struggling with in my current team. It's far easier to fall into a sleepy mode if you are mob programming, especially these days remotely. That person that's sitting there without the video camera and silently, it's really easy to lose them. And I'm not an expert in mob programming. I'll say that up front. But when you're mob programming, the biggest thing that we see when it works well is you're all working together on a problem and you'll find something that's really hard that you need to climb over. And at that point, we could have 2 of us go into a breakout session, and we would do research on this while the rest continued with something else. And when we finished our research, we'd bring that back into the main mob, and then we'd go further as a team. So it can be really useful, but it's also a lot harder to get right. My current team, they've just gone back to pair programming as opposed to mob programming. They've done mob programming for a couple of months because they noticed that they were getting really, what's the word here? Sloppy is one word, but it's how they communicate with each other. And again, over Teams all day, if 2 people speak, it's really hard to understand each other, and it's really hard to cope with in a way that a mob of people together isn't. So I don't know if that's the answer that you were looking for. It's a really tough one. It depends. It can be. My experience is that it isn't always. That then maybe I've just not tried hard enough, and my team hasn't managed the situation enough to make it work.
Would you say that pair programming is a good entryway into mob programming?
Yeah, in my experience, yes. We started pair programming, and then you see it kind of slowly expand. We found it mainly if we had a pair and we were missing some expertise, then we got the next person in. And we found that we enjoyed working that way, so we carried on.
That's nice. How do we make sure not to get trapped in that just one more fix mentality when 2 devs are working on the same problem? You know what this is about, don't you?
I know. I've dealt with this one. This is when I was talking about keeping the pull requests small. This is one of those issues when you're desperately trying to keep your pull requests small, focused, easy to maintain. There's 2 things that cause that to stop. One is when you start thinking with the keyboard. So you have an issue, and rather than taking that step back and thinking, you just keep on typing stuff until you've changed 30,000 different files. It's still not quite working, but we'll just change one more to make it work. And the other one is when you're doing those HTML changes, and it's, well, this pull request is only for this text change. While I've got this pull request open, there's this tiny bug here. I'll just add this one to it, and maybe this thing over here as well. And in order to solve that, we have somebody in our pair or mob that we designate as the devil's advocate. And it's something that the team wanted to do themselves, and it worked really well. At the point where we go, well, can't we just make this one more fix? It's like, nope. That's not a fix. That's not this pull request. Stay focused. Get this PR done, and then move on. It can also be a real issue depending on your pull request process. So when I started at my new job earlier on this year, our pull request took an hour or 2 to complete. And at that point, it's really hard to say, let's make a pull request for this text change. Now they take 2 minutes, and there's no excuse anymore. Because now in those 2 minutes, it gives you a breather, you can continue, and you don't lose time by splitting stuff up into a small pull request and then having to merge everything at a later date. So that's kind of the 2 things that I would say there. It's make sure that you have someone watching out for yourself, and make sure that you have a process for your pull request that allows you to do this.
Nice. Oh, this one I'm betting you get asked a lot.
This one I get asked an awful lot.
Is it really efficient to have 2 devs? I mean, technically, you end up with a half of the code, right?
It's the way that I generally answer this is saying I don't get paid to put code into a machine. I get paid to solve people's problems. The less code I can produce to solve that problem, the better, because it's less that I have to maintain. And if I have 2 people thinking with me on doing something, chances are it's going to be solved better, and it's going to be solved in a more maintainable way. So in the long term, I really think it's more efficient to have 2 people working on one machine doing something. In the short term, getting it to the point where you can release, I'd probably say it's about 125%. So we spent 25% longer doing something, but that lead time is still nearly 50% less.
Interesting.
And in the future, it just gets so much better.
How does it work with remote pairing? And you touched a little bit on this one, but so many people are working from home now.
Yeah, this one. At the beginning of this year, before we went into lockdown, I was at SweetHug in Stockholm and I was on .NET Rocks and got asked this question. And I said, I don't think remote pairing's going to work unless you have a really good working relationship with that person before you start. I'm happy to say I was completely wrong. And the last 6 months has actually proved to me that it's quite possible to do. There are different challenges that it throws up. For example, it's far harder to just pass that keyboard to somebody else now. Now, there's tools that we can use to do this with live share. You can actually do this a lot easier than you could before. Obviously, you can share your screen inside of Teams or whatever communications app you use. But that's not always the easiest. And we noticed with Teams, we had a solution where you needed to be admin in Visual Studio in order to build it. And if you're admin and you share your screen, the other person still couldn't type. So it meant that we actually had to do commits and pushes and pulls in order to change. And that really badly affected our working flow. So there we ended up having one person driving for one pull request, and then maybe another person driving for a second. If you've got nice small solutions, live share works quite nicely, and then you can flick between each other quite easily again.
Awesome. Have you ever had a really bad experience with the pair programming?
Yep, I've had them certainly when we start and you go through the whole sleepy pairing stages. And even now when it gets good, there's still times when it doesn't quite work as much as maybe you want it to. So, yeah, it's the worst experience is still when that person's not using the keyboard shortcut, when it's really hard to explain what you mean. And what I said in my talk about if you can't explain it, go to a whiteboard, that's really hard to do now. And then it gets really frustrating for everybody trying to get that understanding shared across.
Yeah.
And of course, if somebody's driving and they're not listening to you, then you just spend half an hour saying, get rid of the async. No, the async. Get rid of the async. No, the async. And you can't actually show them what you mean because they are 30, 40 kilometers away in a different place. That's really frustrating.
That person. I've met that person or a person like that. How do you deal with if one person is more experienced or more versed in the code base to make sure that the less experienced person doesn't become stressed or passive?
I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but basically the more experienced person needs to learn humility and needs to learn to show the world that they make mistakes too. Invite the other person to give them feedback on what they're doing. It's the only way that you can really try and balance out when you have someone who is absolutely, you're the senior person and I've just got to watch what you're doing, and pull them into the process and really make yourself vulnerable. Because once you start to do that, you can really start to work together. And even these less experienced people, they can give us great insights. I've learned some fantastic things from some of our supposedly junior developers, but it only happens if the person is open to allowing that to happen. So I think this is kind of the onus is on the more experienced person here to show that softer side, to show that vulnerability, and to allow themselves to be fallible. So it's The way that I like to do this myself, it's what works for me. It might not be what works for other people. If I have an idea and I put it out there to people who are, to be fair, it doesn't matter if they're more or less experienced than me, but if I've got an idea and I put it out there, I don't want to be that person in the room that's making decisions because of who I am. So I will just outright ask the question, tell me why I'm being stupid. I really invite people, poke holes, find problems. Don't be afraid to tell me I'm wrong. You've got to make that other person totally comfortable to do that. It's not easy, and it's really uncomfortable for you, the more experienced person, but it's on you to do it.
I love that answer. Great advice. So have you had any really good experiences then?
The best experiences I've had is when we've really got into a flow one afternoon. I've had it with my current team, but the one that totally stands out is the first time it happened in my head at my last company. We spent an afternoon working. We did have that 40-minute pull request issue, and we found a way to mitigate it. And me and a colleague just got in the zone, and we cleared a few stories in one afternoon, making pull request after pull request, working through. And on the way home, I got a WhatsApp from him. And it was just, that was a fantastic afternoon's work. I am so energized. Can't wait to do this again tomorrow. And I was smiling the whole way home. I had exactly the same feeling, but it's just awesome when both of you share that.
That's perfect. Is there a way to handle if one of the persons are a little bit reluctant to pair programming?
The only way that I've found that works so far is to show them that it works. You've got to lead by example, and you can't force anybody to do this. So you've got to take the time, you've got to take them on the journey. And it might be that it would just never work for them and they are never going to do it. And it might be that if you take them maybe into a pair that is working well and show them how it works and try and include them in the conversation, you can bring them along. It's not a guaranteed thing, but it's the best that I found that you can do.
Of course, people are different, aren't they?
Yeah. I say this isn't going to work for everybody. There are some people that just truly are not going to do this. But I'd still recommend trying it and seeing if you can make it work.
So in your current team, how often and how long are you doing pair programming or mob programming?
Pretty much the whole day.
Yeah?
Yeah. It's the teams that we have, we try and make sure that it's at least 2 people. Some teams do a mob, some teams do pairs. But it's pretty much, you get online at 9 o'clock, we start pairing, and they stop pairing when they finish.
That's awesome.
So we start for lunch. The nice thing about the mod programming is you can drop in and out as your energy level wavers. But if you still got 2 or 3 people left in there working, you can come back in later, and if everybody stayed focused, you can probably pick up where they are inside of 5 minutes and join in again.
Nice.
And if you can't, then it's an indication that maybe the team's lost focus and they're trying to do too much at once.
Oh, yeah. That would probably be me. Fantastic. Do we have any other questions about pair programming or mob programming? No? Awesome. This has been so much fun.
It's been an enjoyable evening. Thank you.
Any last tips you have before we say thank you?
Stay focused. Keep your changes small. And don't think with your keyboard when doing it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be posting this on YouTube, and we will be back in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Have a good evening, everybody.
Good night, everybody.